So, Mere Christianity, Book 3, Chapter 2, the Cardinal Virtues. This is like a continuation of what's gone before, and he admits it's because he ran out of room. He didn't have enough room to fully do it, because what the previous chapter or chapters were his radio talks put into authorial form. And he gives the reasons why he does this. But he said there are 7 virtues. 4 of them are called cardinal, and obviously 3 are theological. And it did make me smile when I thought about the 3, because obviously it's love, hope and charity, which, if you know World War II history, were the 3 planes that Malta had for air protection during the war. Little biplanes. So anyway, but we're not talking about them. We're talking about the cardinal virtues.
Yeah, we are indeed. The cardinal virtues, 4 of them are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. I do love that word prudence. Such
Dear
a
Prudence.
good word. If I've read this right, and if my understanding is right, and it may not be so, please do correct me. This is something that Christians would inherit from the classical moral philosophy of people like Plato, Aristotle, all of that sort of thing. And I think what Lewis does here is that he's starting to stress, isn't he, that Christianity doesn't abolish any of those natural or those sort of philosophical moral aspects of wisdom, but what Christianity does is it sort of absorbs it all and then it completes it. So it's like putting the icing and the cherry on the cake. Just like we were talking off air a little while ago, all of that root network is done below the surface, and then eventually it pops up through. And this is where Christianity now starts to draw on that richness, and pop up through.
Absolutely. Cardinal is nothing to do with the church. He says this, and it comes from the Latin. Now, it depends which Latin you taught, because there is the classical Latin, and then there is a much more recent church Latin. But originally it was virtutes cardinales. And cardinales is not the cardinal of the church. It's like a hinge on a door. It's a pivot.
Yeah.
Your life swings on this pivot, this bedrock, which, as you say, was something that looked back to ancient times, ancient Greece, because the Romans didn't really have their own culture. They cobbled it together from different places, kind of. They beat the hell out of people and said, right, we're going to take your ideas.
No, that's right.
But they sound wonderful in Latin. Prudentia, justitia, fortitudo, temperantia.
Brilliant.
So they've just literally remained almost the same in modern English.
Yeah, and most things do sound powerful and noble and all the rest of it when you put it into Latin. I did a after-dinner speech a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday night, and I talked about ecclesiastical Latin and how even if you put your shopping list into ecclesiastical Latin, it all sound quite impressive. And so I ran through a few items of groceries in the shopping list, and it got a few giggles.
He actually makes a comment very early on. I guess he could be forgiven for saying it, but I would just add a little caveat. He said, the cardinal ones are those which all civilized people recognize. The theological are those which, as a rule, only Christians know about. Okay, possibly. Not going to say is wrong, but I think there are some people who aren't Christian that would know about them as well, recognize them, possibly with a different lens. And we talked about this on our other channel. Everything that we're going to be talking about now, our understanding is based on our own lens and our own understanding and worldview. So bear that in mind. We may say something that you, the listener, don't agree with.
And that's not a bad thing.
No, absolutely.
I like it when I don't agree with somebody. It doesn't mean to say I don't like them. It doesn't mean to say I'm...
Does it mean you're disagreeable?
It doesn't mean I'm disagreeable. It doesn't mean to say that they're wrong. It doesn't mean to say that I'm right. It just means that you should be able to have a good old conversation and a debate about things. It's healthy. I think that's such a good thing to do. And then go for a drink together afterwards type thing, you know. That's the way it should be.
So he lays out what they are, and of course your favourite one comes up first, which is prudentia, prudence. Prudence in art is a woman wearing a green dress.
I always think of Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson. I'm sure it's Nigel Lawson who always talked about being prudent. It's such a great word, and it encapsulates so much. So, and because it's an old word. It's not the sort of word that we would get thrown around today in common parlance. So what do we mean by prudence? Well, in a nutshell, it's the virtue of right reason in action, the ability to judge correctly what is right, what is wrong, and what should be done in any given situation. Really nice and simple. That's what we're talking about, being prudent.
You say it's simple. That doesn't mean people can do it.
No.
Willing to do it.
No, it's simple. It's simple in terms of what it means. But it's like so many simple things. They are very difficult to live life by. The Christian faith is very simple in what it means, but it is an absolute nightmare to live. Hard work. So prudence, it's not about being cautious. It's about having a quality of thinking. And that's really important, I think, for Lewis, because he reckons that Christianity is certainly something that an educated mind should actually turn their head to. To him, Christianity demands a very alert and a very educated mind. And this is one of the things that we bang on about in so many of our conversations. People don't think critically. They don't ask questions. And an educated mind, that doesn't mean to say I don't think that you've got to go to Oxford or Cambridge or anything like that, but it means that you've got to be willing to engage your brain, be willing to think. Yeah. Quality of thinking, using your mind.
And what Lewis says is that Christ said we could only get into his world by being like children, not childish, childlike.
Yeah.
But many Christians have the idea that provided you are good, it does not matter being a fool. He thinks that's a misunderstanding.
And I would agree with him. I don't think that we're supposed to be foolish at all. We're supposed to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. That means that we are supposed to have our wits about us. We're supposed to be people who are tuned in, not tuned out. I would agree with him. I think that Christianity should never, ever, ever be about anti-intellectualism.
Yes.
And to be fair, I see some of this in some conversations that I've had with very good, long-standing Christian men and women who say to me there's no point in studying, there's no need to study, because all I do is rely on the Holy Spirit to tell me what I need to think. And I say, well, that's not quite the way you should be looking at it. You should be training your mind. You should be studying. You should be engaging with the scriptures, because you need to be able to discern what is the Holy Spirit and what is another spirit, because you might be opening your mind to things that you don't want to open them to or should not open them to.
Lewis has this wonderful clipped tone about him because of his era. In fact, I've mentioned this before, I think, on our other channel. I'm reading this 9-volume set called The Second Great War. It was written in 1946-47. And the English language, for those who were then writing such monumental pieces of work, uses language that we don't get today. And you get Lewis here saying it. He said, this is about Christ. He wants a child's heart, but a grown-up's head. He wants us to be simple, single-minded, affectionate and teachable, as good children are, but he also wants every bit of intelligence we have to be alert at its job and in first-class fighting trim, which is, it's typical coming out of the war, and we would have heard that in the Navy as well.
Oh, totally. You need to be fit for purpose. You need to be ready to engage the enemy, and you need to be up to speed in all of those things. What we don't need to do is be slackers, as Lewis actually calls them, I think. God is no fonder of intellectual slackers than any other slackers. So if you're thinking of becoming a Christian, I warn you, you are embarking on something which is going to take the whole of you, brains and all.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's absolutely right, you know. I was speaking on Sunday, and I was talking about the Christian faith. And I was saying, if you have been told that you're coming to the Christian faith because name it, claim it, grab it, blab it, that sort of stuff, you've come to the wrong faith. This is the faith where you put your head above the parapet, you're going to get shot at. You're moving into a battleground. You can't be complacent with this walk. This is not the game that we are involved in. And Lewis is absolutely right. When you come into the Christian faith, you need your wits about you, and you need to be really focused on what it is that you're doing. And it takes up all of your life. It really does. It's going to take all of you, your brains as well.
He talks about that, doesn't he? Because he actually gives a quote about giving money to charity. Because he's talked about being childlike, with a child's heart. But he said, just because you give money to charity doesn't mean that you should not stop and think, hang on, are these fraudulent or are these real?
Yeah.
You don't just give money because you think you have to.
Yeah.
Ask searching, penetrating questions.
And why would you not encourage people to ask searching, penetrating questions? If the faith that you claim to stand upon is actual and is real, then it will be able to take all of those probing questions, and it will be able to respond coherently. It will. It's a very reasonable belief. Can you prove it beyond reasonable doubt? Probably not. But can you?
Or can you?
But I think that you can prove it to such an extent that it is far more reasonable to believe than not, if you approach it honestly. Don't then mistake the Christian faith with the institution of various churches purporting to be Christian. There's a big difference.
Yes, and also the wrong approach, for instance, if you're sitting in a pew on a Sunday and you're praying, in a way, he's saying that that's a babyish way that you had as a 5-year-old. You've got to go beyond that, because especially as you become maturer, although he does say that, he couldn't say this in the modern education system, He said, it is of course quite true that God will not love you any less or have less use for you if you happen to have been born with a very second-rate brain. Can't say that in education now.
No, but let's face it, some people haven't got the flipping brains they were born with.
No.
They really haven't. Or they've got them, but they choose not to use them. And that's just such a shame. And again, I blame those educators, Mark.
Blame me. He doesn't pull punches here. He said, look, God wants everyone to use what sense they have. And then that goes into that thing that you've talked about. God is no fonder of intellectual slackers. In other words, don't just sit there thinking you don't have to do anything.
No, that's right. Well, why would you? This is the thing.
Do.
Yeah, they do, but this is the thing. It's not about, and Christianity has never been about getting your ticket clipped and now you're on the glory train to heaven. It's never been about that. We have been sold an absolute lie by people for too many years that's what it's about. It's not about that. It's about getting stuck in and recognising that this God-man that you worship, you have now given him authority and lordship over your life, which means he chooses to do with you what he wants. And that can be very, very challenging. But that's what you go for. It's all or nothing.
Wonderful piece here towards the end when he's talking about prudence. He said, a Christian will soon find out that being a Christian, his intelligence begins to be sharpened. It needs no special education to be a Christian because Christianity is an education in itself.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about temperance, prudence, justice and fortune having an older history going back into the times of the pre-Socratics, really, and Socrates. Now, philosophy to this day will get people to think, oh, that's hard, that's too hard, I can't do that. My head, it's talking about virtues and ethics and the upright man and all that kind of stuff. Christianity is no different.
Oh, gosh, no.
And in fact, I will agree, and anybody who's listened to our podcast, how long did it take us to get through the first 11 chapters of Genesis?
Long time.
18 months. Every word has to be studied compared to its next one, even in English.
Yep.
The depth that you go through, you can't rush. Although you could read the Bible in a year, and I know that you're one of the many that would read a Bible every day, parts of it. That doesn't mean that you're fully engaging with it depth
I'm not studying
that you could.
No, I'm not studying it.
No.
Not when I read it like that. It's like you stand in the shower and you let the shower drop over you. When you study it, you draw the bath and you lay in the bath and you immerse yourself in it. There's a big difference. And while you might get wet in both of them, there is a very, very big difference between drawing a bath, laying out in it, immersing yourself completely in it, and then just constantly topping it up and standing under in a shower and let it flipping piddle over you type of stuff.
They're your words.
My words.
Anything else to say about prudence? It's also known as wisdom.
He criticises the stereotype of the good Christian as being naive and unthinking, doesn't he? To him, Christianity demands an educated mind, and Christianity itself will give you that education. And I think from my own experience, that's probably right. I have learnt a lot more over the last however many years now that I've been really studying this book. And not just about Christianity, about so much other stuff. About empire, about history, about philosophy, about science. I've learnt so much through the study of Christianity.
Yeah.
So it becomes a really beautiful diving off place where you can swim out to all of these different areas. I agree with Mr. Lewis in what he has pointed out.
The second one, temperance, is a woman that in art is always shown as a blue dress. You can see why, because historically Mary was always shown with blue. I don't know if there's any kind of coming together there, but it's not teetotalism, which a lot of people have come to think means.
It's not about not doing something either. It's about self-control in what you do. So it's about moderation and the proper use of pleasure. It's not saying don't drink alcohol. It's saying don't drink alcohol until you fall down. And sometimes be willing to abstain from it.
And I'm raising my glass to you now, sir. I'm drinking some wine.
And I finished mine. That's what it's about. It's not about abstaining and cutting everything off. It's about using and doing moderation, right place, proper use. And that goes for everything, for all of the pleasures. Moderation in alcohol, yes, but moderation in every pleasure that you get involved in. It's about using that pleasure properly rather than abstaining entirely.
And it's also, as he said, it's not just abstaining for the sake of it, although there's a good reason. But he doesn't condemn others because he likes to see people enjoying themselves, obviously, in moderation, I guess.
Yeah. I just think that's the right way to approach all of these things. It seems to me And I was having this conversation this morning with somebody, that it is the people who determine that they have a very high moral high ground, the moralists of the world, who put people into these buckets of you must not do this, you must not do that, you must not do the other. And I think to myself, when you sit on such a high pedestal of moral rigour, you are going to fall off, mate. It's not.
Yeah.
It's just not about that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I made a note here, because he said the moment a Christian starts saying the things are bad in themselves or looking down the nose at other people who do use drink or whatever, he or she has taken the wrong turning. So why has that become a thing with so many?
I think it is such a thing with so many, because so many people want to be able to look at themselves and think that they're all right by comparison to that person. It's far easier to point the finger at somebody else who's doing something really bad that you wouldn't do, because that's not your vice or that's not your leaning. And so you can point the finger at them and go, oh, they're terrible, filthy, rotten, dirty sinner for doing that. But yet you're the one who is wrapped up in your own mind about certain other things, whether that's jealousy, whether that's anger, whether that's lack of self-control, whatever it might be. But those are often less visible, or they are often more in private. Then, you can point the finger at the person who's staggering home drunk, or rolling a joint in the corner, or standing outside the pub smoking, and you can look down at them and think that they're a dirty, filthy sinner. You need to look at yourself first. You need to take a long, hard look at yourself, and not only the things that you actually do in your life, but the things that you think, because that's where everything goes downhill. It's how you think. Iniquity is that thing that your eye hooks onto. And I think that's really important, that we take a very hard look at ourselves before we take a look at somebody else. So remove the plank from your own eye before you remove the speck from somebody else's.
Because he gives a warning, doesn't he, towards the end of explaining about this, because he said that a man who makes his goal for his motor bicycle the centre of his life, or a woman who devotes all her thoughts to clothes or bridge, does that happen still, or her dog, is being just as intemperate as someone who gets drunk every evening.
Yeah, that's right. It's just that we determine that certain vices are not as bad vices as others. This is often the Christian way, that there will be certain things which are very high up on the Christian moral radar, and there will be other things where that's not quite so bad. But actually, good, bad by comparison to who? God.
Yeah.
You either meet God's standard or you don't, and God's standard is perfection. So is that perfect or not? No. Then it doesn't meet God's standard, therefore it is wrong, irrespective. It's not degrees of wrong. There is in criminal law, we grade everything, murder is worse than shoplifting, and that's reflected in the sentence that you'll get. But a failure of God's law is the failure of God's law, whatever it is. And not only is it the actual breaking of God's law, it is the thinking about breaking God's law that's as equal to the act. We stand on this big pedestal precariously. So temperance brings freedom, because it gives you the ability to enjoy all of those things that you're allowed to enjoy without becoming enslaved to them and without feeling guilty that you're doing them. Yes. So you live in liberty, and that's what Christ won for you. He won liberty. You don't have to hand wring every time you pick up a glass of wine or that sort of thing, or wonder whether you should or shouldn't, or the pastor's going to catch you.
You mentioned justice earlier, the ranking of the law. Well, we'll go on to justice, which historically is often shown as a woman in orange. It's not necessarily the law courts. It's an old name, as he said, for everything we should now call fairness.
Yeah.
Honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promises.
Absolutely. Old-fashioned name. Justice, very old-fashioned name. It's all of that sort of stuff. And it is this incredible virtue. Justice, when you look at it in that sense, fairness, honesty, carrying out your duties, keeping your promises. It's all of those sorts of concepts and all of those virtues that actually stabilise our society. They are like rocks upon which our society is built. Without fairness, without honesty, without duty, without recognising that somebody who makes you a promise is going to keep it, where does that leave your society?
Look at the society now.
Well, that's right.
How many people can't be bothered to tell the truth and keep it?
Yeah. So what are we seeing in society? We're seeing social
breakdown.
A complete breakdown of social cohesion. We're seeing a breakdown of community. We're seeing a breakdown of trust. We're seeing a breakdown of faith within our institutions. Why? Because they haven't been fair, they haven't been honest, they haven't done their duty properly, and they certainly haven't kept their promises. And this it undermines all of this.
He doesn't really have much to say about justice beyond that, and he actually, in the same paragraph, then goes on to the next one.
Oh yeah, fortitude. Just as we do that, though, can I just make the point that I think that the way Lewis looks at justice is that it's a relational thing. It governs how we treat one another. It becomes a very relational thing because it is very tied into the way society operates. So it is about this consistency and this faithfulness in the way that we relationally work with one another, which will then feed in probably into fortitude.
Which is traditionally shown as a woman wearing red. And
Woman in Red. We know a song about that.
A woman in red. Yeah, that's right. Who was that now?
Christopher.
The lady in Christopher. You'd know that.
Yeah, Christopher. Yeah.
It includes both kinds of courage. The kind that faces danger as well as the kind that sticks it under pain, he says.
Yeah. Remaining faithful, right? Even when it's difficult. Facing danger, endurance to go on, and remaining faithful even though it's difficult. And I think that sort of aspect of fortitude is something that really becomes apparent and really speaks to people when you do see folk who may have lived a life which is faithful life, and they've demonstrated it. They've been a good regular churchgoer, they've done all of those good things, they've lived a very good Christian life, but when they suddenly hit a really difficult time and you watch them and you see them remain faithful through that difficulty, you go, these are people with fortitude. These are people who have really got something. Courage, not just in the sudden danger, but in that long and grinding and difficult walk. That's fortitude.
Guts, he calls them.
Yeah, gutsy, real gutsy. And as I was talking, I was thinking of a particular couple who come to our fellowship who for many years watched their daughter deteriorate from a disease in the brain that basically meant that she had a missing enzyme and it's failed to help clear the crud out of her brain. And so you just saw a very, very bright, young, incredibly intelligent girl move into almost like a vegetative state. And you just watched her life just ebb away from her. And I used to see her, and she used to be brought into the church, in a wheelchair, and couldn't walk, and she'd have the most beautiful little smile, and I'd always be a bit cheeky with her, and we'd always have a bit of a laugh and a giggle. But her parents were an absolute beacon, I believe, of what it means to show fortitude. They just walk that very long and grinding, difficult path, and they remain faithful all the way through, even through that difficulty. And I take my hat off to them.
Lewis says that you can't have the other three without fortitude. The fortitude is the bedrock.
Yeah.
And just talking as we do and looking at an image I've got in front of me here, I just can't help thinking about the apostles, which we are currently have just recorded and putting up. You think of the temperance that they showed, the prudence, the sense of fairness, justice, and the fortitude to do what they did.
Yeah.
I forget about which one. It might have been Simon the Zealot, that we're still talking about these 2,000 odd years later. Now, yes, they were written in the Bible, but there are others similar that weren't, that we're also talking about. This willingness to buck the trend of society and say, no, I'm going to stand up for these four cardinal virtues, as they became known, against what society tends to do and say, and yet they are remembered.
Yeah.
Where at the time there'll be suffering, they'll have to be put up with a lack, they get pilloried. I mean, you rightly said, if you want to be left alone, don't become a Christian.
No. It's a moral life that requires bravery. It really does. Christianity is not comfortable, it is not weak, nor is it for those who wish to be comfortable or for those who are weak in terms of their commitment to it. It's just not. It's not a comfortable walk. It's very challenging. And I think if somebody, you say, has been sold the line that it is comfortable and it's easy and it's a cushy world, I don't know what sort of branch of Christianity they're walking. I mean, we've talked about all of the apostles. Out of the 12 disciples that Jesus chose, how many of them were martyred for the faith? Out of the 12, 10 were martyred for the faith.
Yeah.
One committed suicide. The other was boiled in for being a vat of oil, and then kicked off onto the island of Patmos to live out his days in exile. Yeah. So I wouldn't want to be in that club. That's not a gang that I'd want to join, because your life expectancy is not good. Unless, of course, what they joined was something that was worth living at that life for and being willing to live bravely for. And these guys are a massive example to us. Massive example.
And it just doesn't happen. You have got to keep going at it. It's almost like a form of training.
Yep.
He even says, C.S. Lewis, there's a difference between doing something just and temperate by mistake or actually doing it because you're trained or you are prepared to be this consistently. Now and then, someone who's not a good tennis player could do a good shot.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make them a good tennis player. He's linking this to the fact that this is what a Christian should adopt and practice all the time.
Absolutely. These cardinal virtues are things that have got to become habits of the heart. They have got to become there. It's not just about doing the right thing occasionally. It's not about just doing an outward sign occasionally. The goal is to produce a certain type of person whose character naturally is inclined towards those virtues. You know, I have this thing that you sow an act, you reap a habit. You sow a habit, you reap a character. You sow a character, you reap a destiny. So that's the way it flows, and it's got to be something that is intrinsic in you. For years and years and years, Mark, and when we were together in the forces, I've always had that belief that there is God, and, you know, I read the Bible, and you and I had chats in the mess about all sorts of religious and philosophical things over the years. But it never changed my heart. I had a head knowledge, but no change of my heart direction. That didn't happen until some years ago over here, and when that happened, it changes everything, because the interior transformation must then be lived out in an exterior way, and not just on a one-off, but a continuous thing. Got to change, interior outwards.
I may have asked before, do you think you were brought here to go through that process?
When I look back, and it's often when you look back that you can start to see all of these different little cogs that turned in order to bring you to a certain point. I don't think that I would have had that transformation in the way that I had it here. I don't think I would have done. I don't know that I ever would have done. So to answer your question, yes, I think that coming to New Zealand was something that changed so many other aspects of my life that it enabled that little cog that was sort of over here to actually run freely and to then engage. Whereas had I not come over here, maybe those other things would have been tighter together and it could never have engaged properly.
But what also should be, and I'm not putting words or assuming for the listener this applies to you, you've got to say whether it does or not. In my own experience, that turning of becoming something is under a lot of pressure, under a lot of stress, and the cogs going around under duress, because we often don't want to go into that realm where we are forced to change and confront ourselves. And you have to be brought pretty low before you start looking up.
Often you have to be poleaxed before you can start to do anything. And you're right, the transformation moments in your life, they will often lay you very, very low in all sorts of different ways before you start to come out of that valley. So it can be a very deep, dark valley. And you and I, we've talked about, you know, the black dog, we've talked about the dark night of the soul. We have both been there in some form or other. And it is when you are in that pit that you can really find out what you're about. And eventually, and hopefully, you can start to claw a path out. But it is a claw.
And I'm glad you talk about the pit, because I'm going to bring this back, well, actually artificially, I do apologise, but to C.S. Lewis. Because don't forget, he wrote this in the war, the Second Great War, World War II. And he says, a man and woman, Reg, who perseveres in doing just actions gets, in the end, a certain quality of character. Now, you imagine what people in the democratic West went through to make sure that totalitarian regimes did not win that war. They had to go through lack of food, rationing. They had to go through the privation of not being able to drive off for a little walk somewhere in the hills. The only thing they could do was walk because of petrol rationing. They lost countless members of family who went to war and never came back. Appalling loss.
Yep.
But they went for it, stuck up under duress of that time. That generation was the greatest generation. So I can see why he says in the end you get a certain quality of character. And that obviously is what he is hoping Christians do.
It's right, though. It's just absolutely right. When you put somebody's life under squeeze, it shows and it develops their character. These virtues that he's talked about, these 4 virtues, these are not automatic things. You become a virtuous person through repeated practice of all of those things, and it is a real slow shaping of the soul. Like when you learn a skill. you learn carpentry, or you learn any other skill, playing a piano, playing a musical instrument, you start slowly, and you have to keep doing what? You have to repeat, you have to repeat, you have to repeat. And eventually that repetition becomes a muscle memory, so that you don't even think about it. It's just what you do. And this is the way that these virtues actually shape a Christian life. It's a transformative morality. It's not just about rule keeping, but it actually changes the individual to the point that the person becomes the type of person who wants what is good, doesn't just do what is good, but actually wants it, and it shapes the whole human being. When I really came to faith, I had a hunger. I had a real hunger to learn, to go to church, to be taught, to open the Bible, to devour it, to read it. And if you haven't got a hunger for it, then you've got to wonder what it is that you've actually got, because it instills a hunger in you to chase it. I used to look forward to going to church. I never looked forward to going to church. My mother could never get me out of bed to go to church. When I was in the forces and I had to go to church because I was 16, and they used to send you to church, I hated it. I didn't want to go to flipping church.
I'm just trying to think, in the whole of the New Testament with Jesus, he's only dealing with adults.
He's only dealing with adults.
Trying to think, if there are the cases in which he's persuading children. I can't remember.
Well, I guess it all depends on how old his disciples are and what defines a child.
No, not the disciples. It's the people he deals with. So they're not like, they've gone through the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah.
Yeah. So
they're considered adults from
they would
13.
all be classed as adult in that society. Yeah.
Because you can't force children to do it.
No.
I don't think.
No, you can't force people. There's got to be a change of heart. You have to desire to do these things. And it's having that desire, and most of the time we don't have that desire. We really don't.
Well, in this world, there's so many distractions now to make it far worse.
Yeah, there is that. That is absolutely true.
And at the end of this chapter, and it's not a very long chapter, it's probably one of the thinnest, we just like to make things take a long time talking about them, Steve. He does his typical polite admonition. It's almost like he's saying, now, fellow Christians, bear this in mind. If we thought only the particular actions, we might encourage 3 very wrong ideas. And then he lays them out. 1, we might think that provided you did the right thing, it did not matter how or why you did it. Public opinion, for its own sake or whatever, and he says, no, right actions done for the wrong reason do not help to build the internal quality of character called a virtue. And the second, we might think that God wanted simply obedience to these rules. No, he really wants people of a particular sort. And the third, we might think that the virtues were necessary only for this present life. And he goes on to talk about, it's quite true that there will probably be no occasion for just or courageous acts in the next world, but there will be every occasion for being the sort of people that we can become only as the result of doing such acts here. So this is the classroom.
Yeah, one of the things that these virtues all point to is they point to, it's all about human flourishing. The classical view that these virtues aren't merely divine commands, that what they are is that they are actual expressions of what it means to be fully human. And then we look at that in the lens of Christianity. Christianity takes that natural insight of what it means to be fully human that's been given to us in all of those great philosophers of old, Plato, Aristotle, etc. And what Christianity does is it then anchors all of that and goes, and how do we become fully human? Well, we look at Christ, because he is the God-man. And everything then becomes anchored in Christ. All of those cardinal virtues are anchored in Christ. Everything is anchored in Christ. So it draws on those great moral traditions. It draws on all of those incredible learned men from many, many years gone past. And it says, yep, these are wonderful virtues, but they're not just divine commands. They're expressions of what it means to be fully human. And this is where they're anchored. They're all anchored in the person of Christ.
And at the end he said that if you don't have even the beginnings of these virtues, effectively then no possible external conditions could make a heaven for you. That is, could make you happy with the deep, strong, unshakable kind of happiness that God intends.
Yeah, and I think that if every Christian or every person who professes Christ could really get that into their soul, that this is what it's about. It's this deep, human, intellectually rich vision of Christian moral formation. That's what this is all about. Drawing it through all of the wonderful people that have gone before And it's allowing those virtues to shape our lives, the whole of our life, in such a way that it just becomes part of muscle memory for us. I mean, what a wonderful way to live your life if you can ever achieve that your confidence, your fortitude as you go through those long winding roads of difficulties of life is just there for you. It's brilliant.
As you say, it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah.
It's active, not passive. And funnily enough, I was talking to some guy, years ago now, I forgot where he's from, somewhere in Africa, where there were no churches. But he led his life based on these four virtues. And he said by living that life is a form of worship, how you live your life in accordance with the virtues. Yeah. He couldn't go to pray. There was no other Christians around him. He was alone on his own. And he said, but he maintained that fortitude to do so. It's the bedrock, isn't it? That it's not just for Christians, but also for other faiths as well. But specifically in this regard, integral to Christianity.
Yeah, and anchored in the person of Christ, but fundamental to every society.